Some 54 million people died in the Second World War. Enough men, women, and children to people all of Great Britain, equal to 1/3 of the entire population of the United States of America. During the 6 years of the war, many millions of ordinary men took up arms to kill each other.
Say after me, teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Get us killed, sir! Trafili mnie! Pod ostrzałem! Jesteśmy pod ostrzałem! Dajcie choć chwilkę! Na ziemię! Chłopaki, posterką!
Gouging the eyes out, ripping the mouth. Gentle on the ground and put in the
The infantryman has to be as hard as the steel and the power of the fighter. It takes toughness and courage to battle your way forward entirely on your own. You can't teach a man courage, but you can toughen him for the big job ahead.
This is the answer, this is the finish of all wars sort of thing, you know. None of us ever comprehended what it could be like. You see, this was
you realize that you're going in to kill, and we've always taught that we had to kill or be killed. When you're faced with this situation, as a young man, I was only 19, it's confusing. You're built for to take orders and to obey orders, but at the same token, you're still a human being.
Noch einmal nachsetzen! Angriff! Braucht jemand einen Sanitäter? Verstanden. Geht's los?
We were psychologically trained as well as militarily trained. We were trained to such a point where you done everything by instinct. You sort of just move.
If you're told to do something, There's never any questioning the lieutenant. This is what you're going to do. And he got up and you started moving up. You tried to do it the safest way possible, but you did it.
If they give you an order, you have to follow it. And you do it by roll. They move up to first squad, and the first squad will move up, like they're robots. And your squad leader is guide. I was a corporal at that time. I was a squad leader. And I'd give the boys an order, they'd do it. I think they fear their squad leader or their platoon leader more than they do the enemy.
You start going on nerves. You no longer function as a human being, you start functioning as a machine.
Panzer! Wir stehen unter Panzerbeschuss!
In a sense, in combat, everybody's on their own. You become your own general, your own corporal, your own sergeant.
Exhausted to a point that's indescribable.
There's so much going on in battle that you don't have too much time to concentrate even when you see a friend die, as I have, because you have yourself to think about.
When you're scared, you know you're more alert. You know, it's like, well, you're playing a game with somebody. You're going to go through the woods. You've got a gun and he's got a gun. Who's going to turn around and pull the trigger first?
Very often, you shot together. Who shot who? You really don't know. You don't know that somebody else shot at the same time, so I guess that may give you a cop-out. You don't know whether you really took the life at the time. When it's down to where two of you are firing on about 14 people, you know that you must be blamed for some. It's not like a game of football or basketball. You know who scored the point.
At 300 yards, we couldn't tell whether it were Germans or Americans, and we started to fire. And that's one time I hope to God that I missed every time I fired.
I don't think I was frightened, I was scared.
There's some people, as you know, show fright more than others. I don't believe that I showed fright. I may have. I tried not to because of the people that I had with me. But I assure you I was afraid.
There's no brave men. Everybody fights for themselves when the time comes.
I think the most significant factor is the desire to survive. And by that I mean the desire to survive consistent with doing the decent thing, by not turning it in front of your mates.
I think everybody was afraid, and later one learns to realise that basically this is what war is about, that it's really two groups of very frightened men facing each other.
Machen alle still! Ja, Herr Kommandant! So kämpft man nicht, ihr Feiglinge!
The first thing that I can remember was the odor of the gunpowder and the artillery fire. The distinct odor you don't forget, and it was the first time I smelled anything exactly like that. And of course, then you're aware of the crack, crack, crack of the machine gun.
The noise of war, which is quite terrific. It's a very funny position to be in, sort of in war with the tanks and some high velocity stuff going off, machine guns, airbursts and shells and one thing and another.
You imagine a large metal vessel and you are inside it, and someone hits the outside with a hammer. You then get this echoing of noise which really penetrates your eardrums.
It's a particularly nasty form of ending one's days if one is trapped in a tank. And the tank brews up and is on fire. You will never lose the awfulness of screams of men trying to get out.
Ich sitze fest! Los, weiter! Let's go!
After a while, we didn't hear the noise the way we had heard it at the very beginning. But it's just like anything else. It didn't bother you anymore. It's like my daughter playing some of the up-to-date music. First couple of minutes of it drives me crazy, and then after a while, I don't know whether I do become completely crazy and don't recognize it.
Although you might have had fairly good training, you don't get much training under fire. When that sort of sorts itself out and you find out which way the shells are going and all the rest of it, and if you don't get winged or knocked out altogether, well, each time you come back, you've got a little bit more confidence. You know when to duck and you don't make a fool of yourself. And when you were quite satisfied they weren't going to be too near you, well, then you didn't do too much about it. But when they came close, we just sort of ducked like anybody else and hope for the best.
You get used to anything after a while, even getting shot at. You needed a number of weapons, and we used a great many weapons.
Flamethrowers. That was the best weapon they had.
It's the idea of kill or be killed. The method of the killing did not make a great deal of difference in one's thinking at the time.
It was just a job, whether you liked it or you didn't like it. That was the man's job. We had flamethrowers, and let's see, there was one in each platoon. I forget now. So long. One, two. I remember 4.
Them guys did some job.
Yeah, we seen the people as they fell. I seen them when I say there was about 14 bodies out there in front of us at that time.
Fall back! Let the little shites be!
Well, I saw people laying out there with their no head and some with their, arms blown off. And some, some of my friends, people that I'd been training with for years, and then you see them get shot, it's pretty sickening.
Feindliche Truppen! Get to cover now!
If several thousand men are killed, in the process of death, they do bleed. There was quite a little blood around.
The odor you'll never forget. The odor you'd never want to smell again. Dead bodies. I couldn't describe it.
So many days you were in one spot. You couldn't advance. And with the casualties, you found yourself in a hole, more or less, with your dead bodies, and the heat bloating them up, making them smell and turn black, and you had to just stay right in that hole with them. You get callous, to dead bodies and bloated bodies, but you never get callous to your own friends.
You could have a sandwich or a dead job anytime. You can't eat with your buddy alongside of you. You can't.
Wir laufen die Befehle! Bewegung!
You see them drop or scream with pain. Sometimes it's just a fleeting glance.
Mir nach!
I got it taking care of some men in a foxhole. One was completely dead of blast concussion. There wasn't a mark on his body, but he was dead. Another fellow, I had to take off his leg. There was nothing left of the leg except tendons that were tied to the body.
And see my friends falling around with gaping wounds in their chest and stomach, their arms and so forth. Some of them even laying there. One minute they'd be talking to us, the next minute they'd be gone.
I heard people hollering and crying out for help, and you couldn't get to them, and they lay out there and holler.
It is a terrifying thought. You walk along with one guy, and you turn around and look back, you see him laying in two pieces. It does quite an effect on you.
The reaction is terrifying in a sense. It only wants you to live more. You want to live more yourself.
Jawohl! Ja, wie die Unterwelt! Ja? Panzer, in Deckung!
Afterwards is when your knees go to jelly and you shake and you sit down and you cry and all that sort of thing.
After the operation, the only thing that we can say that we mourned our dead, we mourned that more than anything. We were so happy to be alive ourselves. We were just so grateful to the Almighty.
Immer mir nach! Ich bin getroffen! Feuern! Männer! Gib mir Feuerschutz!
One was terribly worried because one didn't know the enemy.
The only time I ever saw them was through field glasses, and I saw them in uniforms and, dimensions of ants.
One was fearful until one had seen them at close quarters. I was involved in taking some prisoner, and I realized that they were human beings.
They showed kindness to their own people too, which we didn't really think, we thought that life was cheap to them, but that's not true. They showed a lot of kindness to their own wounded and would tote them on their back, although they had enough trouble just carrying themselves, but they would find the strength to carry their wounded the same as we would. So they were people just like us.
Well, it struck me how much like gods they were. Apart from the clothes and the uniform, they could have been anyone.
Angriff! Wir verlieren an Schwung. Zurückfallen, Männer! Suppressive fire!
I was sort of disappointed because in my own mind, I was going to see somebody who was in the pink of condition, who looked like everything a soldier should look like and be completely dignified, in fact, being disdainful and arrogant. And they were a mess when I saw them. They were filthy, they were dirty, they were beat up, they were...
The anger I think that most soldiers feel in war is a very personal anger. They go into battle, they're frightened, they lose a friend. The friend is killed, and he's killed by that faceless fellow over there who was shooting at him. There's where the anger comes in. I don't think you become a German hater or a Japanese hater or anything else.
The longer you stay in combat, the more concerned you are about casualties, and impressing upon your commanders that when they're assigned an objective, you're going to hold them responsible for doing it the easy way rather than the hard way. Naturally, the longer troops remain in battle, the more they want to be supported with artillery and air. They're through with their fearing they'll miss the war, and they're ready to go out and slug it out. And they said, if we can do it with the air, let's not spill the blood.
It is what is known as saturation bombing, and you felt the earth had come to an end. It spouted in front of you, it shocked, it shuddered, the whole landscape changed. I thought, there can't be a living German. And the astonishing thing is, about 3/4 of an hour later, the Germans rose out of all this mess and came hopping towards us again.
We were bombed quite often by mistake. We had a saying in the army that when the British bombed, the Axis took cover. When the Germans bombed, the Allied took cover. But when our cousin Americans bombed, everybody took cover.
The battlefield is very funny. It's extraordinary how inanimate the whole thing seems. There's a little bit of an action going on in the right-hand corner of some sort. For the rest, there are people lying about, smoking. It's one of the very singular things that films and books don't bring out. I think Tolstoy perhaps is the exception. Of a battlefield where nothing seems to be happening. The action is always over a hedge somewhere in another corner, and it's the decisive thing. And then they ask you if you were there.
War is, of course, excruciatingly boring. I think I've never been so totally, absolutely bored as I was in the Army.
We were so preoccupied with the business of eating, sleeping, fighting, surviving that I certainly never remember discussing the outcome of the war or whether the Germans were right or we were right or anything like that at all.
The person who had lived well prior to the war missed his steaks and chops and what have you, but I mean, I never missed them because I never had them. You see, I was dragged up, as we say, lived in hovels, you know. The army for me, and people were looking after me, I was elected sort of thing, you know.
Well, it does seem mad, it seems incredible, but I think if people get used to suffering and living in slums and going without, they adjust themselves to this environment. And I think we became to accept it. It seems incredible to pick any of you men up now and drop you out in the middle. I'd be doubtful whether you'd endure it. But the change was gradual.
War is, of course, the study in extreme situations, and one's mood does shift at an astonishing rate.
An army has the morale of change, of being taken out of the humdrum routine.
Myself, I always felt one good time made up for 5 bad times. That's how I looked at it.
You can be scared to death one minute and laughing the next.
artillerymen, and you help to fire shells at that time, I guess about 9 or 10 miles away. You're not really conscious of what sort of destruction you're creating.
We're all unable to imagine what people are feeling a few hundred yards away. It is very much a lack of imagination. One of the greatest human weaknesses, I think.
Didn't quite realize what it was until we actually moved through by convoy. We had an opportunity to see massive destruction on a wholesale scale.
Many soldiers, particularly artillerymen and flyers, had to kill innocent women and children, non-combatants. It seems to me, in a moral sense, there's been a great deterioration in modern warfare. Civilians are always a nuisance. Hungry, shivering Italians came to our mess for leftovers. And we, at first, gave them a good deal, eating less ourselves. But then came an order to bury all food that wasn't consumed. And we were forced to throw huge amounts of uneaten food into a hole in the ground and cover it up. This was an appalling thing for us because the Italian civilians looked very hungry and in fact were very hungry. The Italians weren't our enemies at that time, but when in doubt, don't do anything that might cause trouble in higher headquarters.
It was a beautiful sight to see these different ships of war, the tremendous power, the flashes, the roar. The thing I used to get a big kick out of was the tremendous power of these battleships when they fire the 16-inch guns. What a crack.
I remember the action. In fact, sometimes I dream about it. There is a certain feeling, I don't care who you are, there is a certain feeling of exultation about combat.
You had mixed feelings there. Pride and fear. You know, you're proud that you're part of an organization. You're afraid you're going to get killed or wounded. And I guess it's man's nature.
You're scared, but there's a certain feeling of exultation, too, in it. Else, why would there be so many wars? At night, you don't know the strength of your enemy or anything else. You know, you may be fighting an enemy that's far superior to what you are. You know, it gives you rather a strange feeling. You're like fighting in the dark, you know. But sure, you would open fire. Your guns are being fired by a radar target, and you in turn are receiving fire. It's rather a weird sensation. You would rather much seeing what you were firing at and what the odds were against you. You wouldn't feel so helpless.
A major naval task force, you come into the most dense firepower ever known in military history.
I can imagine being up in an aircraft and looking down and seeing all that come up at me. It would be unbelievable. It would be just like some kind of a dream. You couldn't believe that it was humanly possible for a fly to get through something like that, but some of them did.
We opened up, and when we splashed our first plane, it was just like being at a football game. Everybody forgot that we was at a war, and we all got up and started cheering. Then it dawned upon us that when we seen this one ship get hit, that this was for real, you know. And we all kind of woke up to the fact that we were at a war, you know.
It was a cloudy, overcast day. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and the Judy that came in and dropped the bombs on us came in at wave height.
It hit this carrier dead center, and as we went by it, our men were abandoning ship. The whole ship just seemed to explode. There was nothing there.
When we were hit, there were 3,226 men on the roster of the ship. The morning after, at General Muster, there were 704. Of course, aboard ship was over 3,000 men. You can't know them all, but you are bound to have lost numerous of those that you didn't. The enormous amount of damage that one plane did by dropping those 2 bombs. It's something that you just can't understand. The number of lives that was responsible for. I believe the worst thing for me was the time when we were trapped and just saw no way out. And that each succeeding explosion accentuated the fact that you weren't going to get out of it. I can remember men that were, many of them, so tense that they couldn't talk if they wanted to. Their inner souls, their inner minds may have been working overtime, but they couldn't have said a word. Others screaming and crying. Such things as that tear you apart.
I think that flying is so impersonal, that is to say combat flying, that you don't get that intimate sense of loss if you see an airplane get shot down that you'd have if your buddy on a battlefield had his head blown off right within arm's length.
I don't think anyone ever considered that he would be killed. Death was something which was just put at the back of your mind. If it was not, you'd have just got the jitters about it and been very worried. If a fellow did go missing, it was just poor old so-and-so, he's had it, and that was that. Inwardly, of course, you'd feel it tremendously if you lost a pal. But it didn't dwell on the subject of death at all.
Exhilaration? I don't know if that's the word. It's almost we've got to do it. You never think of getting shot down. You never think of any self-danger. You do after you're hit, because I went through it once, and then you start thinking of self-preservation, but not at that time.
When you were fighting a particular man in his machine and you in your machine, the sky became empty. You didn't see anyone else. There were 200 or 300 aircraft, and then suddenly nothing. It was just one against one, and sometimes you knew he was very good, sometimes you knew he wasn't so good. And you could assess the situation fairly closely as to whether he might be lucky and hit you, but otherwise you could get him.
Now, shoot down is simple. You had to calculate the lead required, that is, how far you would lead your guns or bore sight line ahead of the target. So you had to estimate the target speed. You had to estimate the angle that you are from the target. In other words, you fire so that when your rounds got there, the airplane, your target, would intercept it.
I think we were just getting on with the war as one would play a game of rugby or cricket to win. That was all. You just played your hardest. The other man had to come down.
Pilots and people who kill at a distance don't have any particular delight in destruction. They have a great delight in their implements and in precision, bombing, and so on. The further you are from the target, the less likely you are to have any understanding of what deviltry your weapons are causing.
You can weave a bit, Skip. Okay, Viola. 30 seconds. There's a flare just to the left. Okay. Okay, we'll keep weaving for a while. 40 seconds. Stand at light, straight and level. Bomb doors open. Bomb doors open. Steady. 25. Steady. Bombs away. 30. There goes the cookie. Lucky. 4,000 tons have just gone up. And good shot. That's not bad at all. Yes, it's not a bad train.
This is a damned unnatural sort of war. The pilot sits among the clouds, quite sure about the values he is fighting for. He cannot hear beyond his veil of sound. He cannot see the people on the ground. He only knows that on the sloping map of sea-fringed town and country, people creep like ants. And who cares if ants laugh or weep?
Yes, sir.
Plane, spotter on target. Read, first 12,800. That's 12,800. 12,800, set.
To us, he is no more than a machine shown on an instrument. What can he mean in human terms? A man, somebody's son, proud of his skill.
At your command.
Compact of flesh and bone, fragile as Icarus. And our desire to see that damned machine come down on fire.
Sappers ready for the off. Quiet down. Listen up.
They're firing at us now.
Hello, Skipper.
Hello?
We've been holding the front there.
Okay.
The oil's leaking out of the front turret, so there's nothing to worry about.
Okay. Okay, boy. Boy, God, I've never seen anything like this before. Neither have I.
I think my fear manifested itself. First of all, I found myself being a little more religious than I had been back in the States. I thought more about my Creator and what I ought to be doing to make sure I stayed in good graces with Him. I don't say that the fear was an acute one, so that you went around trembling. But I think that it was pretty well felt that our chances of surviving were not particularly good. But after all, it was what we felt we had to do, and I felt that if you were going to die, that was about the best way to die. I'd much rather die in an airplane than in the mud on some battlefield.
I think the overriding fear is the fear of making mistakes.
There's the confusion of battle. Everything goes topsy-turvy. So you sort of forget that overriding fear, and you just try to take care of whatever's right at hand.
I think it was generally understood that the combat tour was 25 missions because it was anticipated that you'd be dead by the end of that time, so there wasn't any point in asking you to stay around any longer.
Suddenly at night, the bombers came in the hard, reverberating bowl of the sky, destroying the factory and the tall cathedral, the dock, the warehouse and the railway station, the rich house in the leafy avenue, and the shouldering tenements of the narrow streets, and the bodies and souls of men. I sought my son among the smoking stones where I had crouched with him clutched at my breast, until the bomb burst and the building shattered down and the dark came and severed my son from me. I cried out with a voice harsh in my throat, "My son, I have lost my son." And charred faces stared at me with pity. And I saw the city burning about me and the flash of guns on the dark smoke. And I heard bombs burst in the fire and in my heart. But no one came to seek my son.
It's all right looking back in hindsight to a lot of this action and whatnot. But we, as boys from school in most cases, in fact, joined the Air Force because they felt this was the best service. And having joined, we accepted that there were people in higher places who knew the actual facts and were directing us in the right way.
These are facts. Observe them how you will. Forget for a moment the medals and the glory, the clean shape of the bomb designed to kill, and the proud headlines of the paper's story. Bodies in death are not magnificent or stately. Bones are not elegant that blast has shattered. This sorry, stained and crumpled rag was lately a man whose life was made of little things that mattered. Now he is just a nuisance, liable to stink, a breeding ground for flies, a test tube for disease. Bury him quickly, and never pause to think, what is the future worth to men like these?
People talk about morality in war. Tell me some action of war that is moral. People say you mustn't do anything to civilians. Good Lord, what's happened to civilians in every besieged city of the past? Haven't they always been starved into surrender and bombarded into surrender? What's the difference between bombarding them with guns and bombarding the cities where they're manufacturing the weapons and the ammunition?
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, and we'll all stay free. Praise the Lord and swing into position. Can't afford to be a politician. Praise the Lord, we're all between perdition and the deep blue sea.
You could get as much employment as you wanted, and large families could really get 84 hours of employment. Families which had never had any money at all were suddenly having lots of money.
As far as unions are concerned, it was a happy war. It was a popular war. It was supported. The unions supported the war considerably. They were busy turning out planes and ships and war material.
There was quite a lot of money made in the factories, but without a shadow of doubt or fear of contradiction, a lot of people made a lot of money out of the war.
Praise the Lord. Oh, praise the Lord. The mighty vision. Praise the Lord. We're up to go and fishing. Praise the Lord. And pass the ammunition and we'll all stay free.
The day was clear when we dropped that bomb. It was a clear, sunshiny day, and visibility was unrestricted.
Quit mucking about. Orders awaiting further orders.
The white light just obliterated the whole sky. I'll never forget it. And we saw off our right wing the cloud coming up from Hiroshima.
How may we serve, son?
Where before there had been a city, distinctive houses, buildings, and everything, now you couldn't see anything except a black, boiling barrel of tar. It was terrible to look at, really, because you knew there were people underneath, and you could speculate what the result was there.
On station.
As far as my personal feelings are concerned, I never let my personal feelings enter into it. I knew there were people down below and getting hurt by this. And I felt that if I let my emotions get carried away and I get to worrying about who's going to get hurt by something like this, that I wouldn't be effective at all. So I had to school myself not to think about it.
The lads are
A weapon is a weapon, and it really doesn't make any difference how you kill a man. If you have to kill him, well, that's the evil to start with, and how you do it becomes pretty secondary. I think that your choice should be of which weapon is the most efficient and most likely to get the whole mess over with as early as possible.
The chaps are ready.
Lesson the Second World War taught us was to keep out of war.
Sappers ready to go.
I think had we not have fought that war in 1939 or 1945, we would not have had the world as we know it today.
Like a shit through a goose.
No war's worthwhile. But all these lives, there's thousands of lives that are lost, and the sadness it leaves behind. Definitely not.
My own viewpoint was that the war for me had been a complete failure because there were 60 million square-headed bastards still living.
I would fight for the government again. I definitely would. And I would fight again tomorrow if I had to go back in again to fight for the United States government.
It was a terrible waste of human life and money, but it had to be done. And there was no way we could have avoided it.
The chaps are ready and willing.
Fracano's army, fall in.
You had a European Civil War that began in 1914. There was a long armistice in that war. It finally comes to an end in 1945. In the process of coming to the end, what happens is that sweeping into Europe from the outside are the Russians and the Americans. And they meet at Torgau on the Elbe River in May of 1945, with the result that no European nation wins the European Civil War. The winners in the European Civil War are, in fact, outsiders, the Russians and the Americans, most of all the Americans.
Germans had tried to conquer Europe. It had taken 6 years to defeat them.
Ready to go.
They were peaceful. Now, was there any way of keeping them that way, apart from dismembering Germany itself?
Well, the whole idea was that you would not split up Germany. The idea had been kicked around in the West, especially by the American Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, that Germany ought to be divided. Germany, of course, had been a united nation only since 1870. The newest of all the nations, really, the youngest of all the nations in the world. And Morgenthau's idea was, let's divide it up, let's split it up, and dismantle all German heavy industry, turn Germany into a farming community only, so that Germany can never again pose a threat to the world. Roosevelt had originally endorsed that idea, and so had Churchill. But by late 1943, they decided that this would be economically a disaster for Europe, that if Europe were to recover from the war, she had to have the productivity of Germany, and most especially of the Ruhr.
Awaited instructions, sir!
And that the Germans themselves would so bitterly resent a division of Germany that you would have enormous problems in the occupation. So, basic decision by early 44 had been made that Germany would be one nation. This still left problems, because Germany is being attacked from both sides. The Russians will be coming in from the east, the Anglo-Americans coming in from the west. And that meant sooner or later they would be meeting each other with all kinds of dire possibilities there, of which the most important was they would start firing at each other by mistake, not recognizing each other's uniforms. There would, of course, be language problems and so on. So you needed an agreed-upon demarcation line that you would stop at and not go and prevent this sort of horrendous situation of Allies firing at each other. What happened militarily was that the lucky accident of capturing the bridge at Remagen intact let Eisenhower's armies get into Germany much faster than anybody had expected. At the time of Yalta, when the decisions were finally sealed and stamp was put on them that the line of division would be the Elbe River, it looked like the Russians would probably not only take Berlin, but would get across the Elbe and quite likely meet the Western Allies along the Rhine. The Western Allies at that time, of course, were just recovering from the Battle of the Bulge, and things looked pretty bad for them. But the recovery from the Bulge was quite a bit quicker than anyone expected. And then it was followed up by the capture of the bridge at Remagen, which let Eisenhower, in effect, get across the Rhine for free. Up till that time, they had thought that getting across the Rhine was going to be almost as big a job as getting across the English Channel in Operation Overlord.
In April, the armies met up on the Elbe River, as planned.
Of course, there was a great celebration at Torgau where they met, dancing and embracing, exchanging of gifts. Very happy time. The United States, of course, during the war had been propagandized into seeing Russia as a democracy, a land of freedom lovers, with essentially broad social aims about the same as those of the West, which seemed to make sense since they were clearly an enemy of the Nazis, and we were an enemy of the Nazis. Thus, it appeared we had a great deal in common. Now, the leaders were, especially the British leaders, and most especially, of course, Churchill, never agreed with this view. But this was, in general, the view of most of the ordinary soldiers and the citizenry of the United States. There was no intention during the war itself of dividing Germany up between East and West. The intention at the time was simply to provide for an orderly administration of the occupied areas. Remember, the first big act after the war is that everybody lives up to the wartime agreements about zonal boundaries, and the thing that stands out here is that the Russians do let the West come into Berlin, which is about 80 miles within their zone. They didn't have to do it. They could have acted in Berlin as they acted in Poland. They could have just said, to hell with you, we're not letting you in. We're not going to live up to the agreements that we signed at Yalta on this. We're going to hold on to Berlin. After all, we captured it. We paid the cost. 100,000 Russians died. Stalin was still hoping for an American loan. He desperately needed to get reparations from Germany, especially from the Ruhr. And if he were going to get these things, he was going to have to cooperate with the West. He recognized this. In areas in which he felt it was possible to cooperate with the West without making too many sacrifices in Russian security, he did so, and I would point to Berlin as the chief example of this. In the case of Poland, he simply couldn't allow the Polish colonels, the Catholic Church, the Polish landlords to come back and take control of Poland. Poland, as he pointed out time and again, had 3 times in the past generation been a gateway for an invasion of Russia. Berlin, he could afford to make concessions on, and he did. So Stalin was clearly eager to get along with the West. He was not a revolutionary. He wanted to conserve what had been gained by the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution. He wanted to conserve the Russian state. He wanted security around Russia's borders. But he was not a man who pushed for a worldwide revolution. There are all kinds of examples of this. Greece, for example, the Greek Civil War was being waged at the time, and the British were very deeply involved. British troops fighting against the communists and radicals generally in Greece on the side of the monarchy. Stalin quite clearly lived up to the wartime agreements with Churchill and refused to support the Greek communists. The Americans were asking for an awful lot. They wanted not only to control the areas that their armies had conquered, but they also wanted to have a major say, or at least an influence, in the areas that the Red Army had conquered. Now, in 1943, when Italy surrendered, the Russians wanted to be a part of the occupation of Italy. Italy, after all, had been one of the Axis powers that had attacked the Soviet Union. But the Americans and the British systematically excluded the Russians from any say in the occupation of Italy. Stalin originally protested against this. But eventually he said, aha, I see. The precedent has been set. The principle is clear. Whoever occupies a country also imposes upon it his own social system. And Stalin was happy enough to accept that precedent. The Americans, however, were not willing to go along with that when the shoe was on the other foot. So the Americans were demanding a major say in Poland, while being totally unwilling to give the Russians any say in the areas that their armies had conquered. From the Russian point of view, if the West was going to go ahead and exclude them from all areas in which Western armies were in control, they had the perfect right to exclude the West from any say in the areas where the Red Army was in control. And they systematically followed this principle for the remainder of the war and into the post-war period, and indeed up to the present time.
Russian suffering during the war had been appalling. Their shattered economy had to be rebuilt. To do it, Stalin had to choose between self-help, turning to his allies, or stripping the conquered nations.
Well, he had those 3 alternatives. He could either do it by forced savings on the part of the Russian citizenry, who had, of course, been through hell for the past 4 years. But if you continued to make demands of them, force them to work, provide them with none of the ordinary consumer goods, Russia could rebuild on her own. This was the least desirable choice, but it was a choice. A second choice that worked hand in glove with it was strip all of the areas that you have conquered. Just move out everything that's movable and bring it back to the Soviet Union and restore the Soviet Union that way. And of course that was done too. Both of those were the solutions that were in fact followed. The third possibility was get investment capital from the United States. And the Soviets did ask for an American loan. But the Soviets were not about to let the Americans come into Russia in the way that the Americans were already beginning to move into France, into Western Germany, in some ways into Great Britain, had already moved into South America. That is, the gigantic American corporations coming in, making investments, and taking control to a certain extent of the economy. This the Russians would never allow. They wanted a loan with no strings attached. The Americans were above all capitalists, and capitalists don't make loans unless there are strings attached to them. So that the only place in the world that the Russians could look to for investment capital, the USA, was, I don't know how the hell to put it. It just wasn't available to the Soviets because of it would mean opening up Russia to Western investment, to Western inspection teams. The United States, when they discussed the loan with the Soviet Union, for example, said, we want you to open up all of your books to us. Well, again, it didn't matter if it was a Tsarist Russia or a communist Russia. The Russians are suspicious of the West, and with very good reason. I don't think there was ever a ghost of a chance of the Russians and Americans creating the kind of world that they like to talk about during the war, an Atlantic Charter kind of world, a United Nations kind of world in which the victors continue to cooperate as they did during the war, because the only reason they cooperated during the war was that they were all deathly afraid of Hitler with very good reason. Russian ambitions and American ambitions were bound to clash. Patton said, now that we've gotten rid of Hitler, we ought to get together with the Wehrmacht and drive the Russians back to the Volga. But that was Patton, bravado, and bluster, and no one in positions of authority ever took such nonsense seriously. And eventually what you get out of the end of World War II is that Russia and America confront each other around the world. And then you have to sort out, well, what belongs to who gets what out of the war. Lines have to be drawn. This is what the Truman Doctrine really means, the doctrine of containment that eventually came in 1947. This is what Churchill means by the Iron Curtain. Much as he hated it, and as much as many people regret the imposition of the Iron Curtain, in fact, the Iron Curtain line in Europe turned out to be, rather like the division of Germany, the best thing. People knew who belonged to what. Rather what belonged to who. So that one of the unexpected results is that you have had a much better, without having had a formal peace conference, you get a better settlement in Europe after World War II than you do after World War I. World War I, they all got down on their hands and knees on these gigantic maps and drew out the lines of where the new countries would be, with the Austro-Hungarian Empire broken up and the German Empire broken up and so on. And it looked like a very smooth and very intelligent settlement. In fact, of course, nothing was settled, as we learned in 1939, not earlier. World War II, you get nothing like that kind of a settlement at the end of the war, so that willy-nilly things fall into place. And we have now had the longest peace that Europe has enjoyed in modern times. And the United States in World War II was very wise indeed. What we did was we paid the Europeans to do our fighting for us. This seems to me the only way that one can look at Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is a program designed to make it possible for Russia and Britain to carry on the struggle against Germany, to maintain a balance of power in Europe that allows the United States to almost, in effect, stay out of the war and yet become the great gainer from it. We get much more out of the war than anyone else. There's a paradox here that very quickly after the war was over, Americans began to take the attitude that, aha, here it is again. We got fooled once more, as we did in World War I. We made this enormous effort. We beat the Germans. We beat the Japanese. And who wins? The Russians win. The Russians get East Europe out of it. We were suckers. This is very widely